A corporate billionaire utilizes his legal syndicate to gag a private citizen, mocks her as her mansion burns to the ground, and publicly celebrates the legal severance of his own firstborn son. It is a clinical, terrifying campaign of total erasure. The perpetrator is 50 Cent. The target is Shaniqua Tompkins. The devastating paradox driving the brutal 50 Cent and Shaniqua Tompkins' relationship scandal is this. She is the exact same woman who fed him through a straw and saved his life when he was a bleeding, shattered man with a wired jaw. Why does a global icon systematically destroy the only witness to his ultimate vulnerability? During this highly volatile period, the most critical component of Jackson's off-street infrastructure is Shaniqua Tompkins. Their relationship is forged strictly in the grueling, high-risk reality of the street-level hustle. Far removed from the sterile environments of Hollywood boardrooms, by 1996, Tompkins gives birth to their son, Marquise. The arrival of the child fundamentally alters the stakes of their existence. While Jackson navigates the lethal complexities of the narcotics trade and attempts a highly precarious transition into the underground rap industry, Tompkins functions as the operational anchor. She manages the domestic reality. She provides the baseline of stability required for a man operating daily under the threat of federal indictment or sudden street execution. She represents the only space where the hyper-masculine armor demanded by South Jamaica can be temporarily removed. Jackson's strategy to exit the illicit economy and penetrate the music industry is inherently dangerous. He does not rely on traditional artist development. In 1999, he releases the track How to Rob, a highly calculated, aggressive manifesto where he systematically details how he would violently mug the most famous and powerful figures in the music industry. This is a clinical demonstration of his psychological profile. He is willing to utilize extreme provocation, painting a massive, highly visible target on his own back to generate immediate commercial leverage. He forces the industry to acknowledge him through sheer audacity. However, the corporate executives in Manhattan are not the only individuals listening to the track. The street factions in Queens recognize the provocation. The boundary between hip-hop entertainment and active street warfare completely dissolves. The consequences of this operational strategy materialize on the afternoon of May 24th, 2000. The location is 161st Street in South Jamaica, directly outside the residence of Jackson's grandmother. It is a targeted, highly coordinated assassination attempt. Jackson is sitting in a vehicle. A shooter, later identified by law enforcement intelligence as an associate of a rival street faction, approaches the vehicle. A 9mm handgun is produced. A rapid succession of bullets is fired at point-blank range directly into the vehicle. The biological reality of the ensuing moments completely shatters the carefully constructed facade of the untouchable street operative. High-velocity 9mm rounds tear through human tissue with devastating mechanical efficiency. Jackson is struck in the hand, the arm, the hip, both legs, his chest, and his left cheek. The bullet to his face shatters his jaw, permanently altering the structure of his oral cavity and his vocal cords. He is bleeding profusely, incapacitated, and entirely stripped of his power. The projection of dominance is violently erased, replaced by the chaotic, desperate, biological imperative to simply continue breathing. He is transported to Jamaica Hospital Medical Center. The environment shifts from the asphalt of Queens to a sterile, highly secured surgical ward. Jackson undergoes emergency trauma surgery. His jaw is wired completely shut to facilitate bone reconstruction. He is placed on strict bed rest, physically immobilized by his injuries. He is a 24-year-old man surrounded by intravenous lines, terrified of secondary retaliation, and entirely dependent on the medical staff for basic survival. Within this critical period of extreme physical and psychological vulnerability, the primary barrier between Curtis Jackson and total collapse is Shaniqua Tompkins. She does not abandon the father of her child when the street violence inevitably breaches their perimeter. She assumes total control of his recovery logistics. She manages the hospital visitations. She navigates the immediate suffocating fear of the assassins returning to finish the contract. When he is discharged and moved to a secure location for a grueling rehabilitation process, she is the primary caregiver. She manages his medications. Because his jaw is wired shut, she feeds him a specialized liquid diet through a straw. She assists a physically shattered man with the most basic degrading biological functions. Tompkins bears witness to the absolute lowest point of Jackson's existence. She sees the terror in his eyes when a car idles too long outside the window. She hears the muffled cries of pain through the wired jaw. She witnesses the profound, unvarnished frailty of a human body traumatized by ballistic violence. She does not see a rap superstar, and she does not see an untouchable gangster. She sees a broken man who requires her total devotion to survive the week. This specific dynamic, the act of saving an individual and witnessing their ultimate vulnerability, plants the psychological seeds for a devastating future conflict. As Jackson's physical body slowly heals, a profound transition occurs. He realizes that the assassination attempt, while nearly fatal, is the most valuable commercial asset he possesses. By 2002, he secures a massive recording contract with Shady Records and Aftermath Entertainment, backed by the corporate machinery of Interscope Records. The label executives analyzing the saturated hip-hop market understand that technical lyrical ability is insufficient to achieve global dominance. They require a mythology. They need an origin story that elevates Jackson from a standard New York rapper to a bulletproof, superhuman entity. The corporate packaging of the trauma begins. The narrative of the shooting is aggressively commodified. The central pillar of this marketing strategy is the number of bullets. According to explosive claims later made by Shaniqua Tompkins, she possessed unedited medical documentation suggesting Jackson was struck by only 5 bullets. While medical professionals on record maintained the count was 9, Tompkins weaponized this alternative narrative. The corporate machinery, however, requires a larger number to maximize the mythological impact. 5 bullets is a severe trauma. 9 bullets is a miraculous resurrection. 9 bullets transforms a victim into a god. The marketing department and Jackson aggressively pushed the narrative that he absorbed 9 rounds at close range and walked out of the hospital. The number 9 is printed on album covers, repeated in global television interviews, and woven directly into the lyrics of multi-platinum singles. The global public consumes the 9-bullet narrative as absolute historical fact. Shaniqua Tompkins watches this corporate myth-making process from the interior of their domestic reality. She possesses the unedited, unauthorized memory of the event And in her version of the history, the math is 5, not 9. She possesses the unedited, unauthorized memory of the event. This knowledge places her in a highly dangerous psychological position relative to Jackson. As the album Get Rich or Die Tryin' shatters global sales records and Jackson transitions into 50 Cent, a multi-millionaire corporate titan, his psychological architecture undergoes a radical defensive hardening. To operate at the apex of the global entertainment industry, he demands absolute belief in his own manufactured invincibility. He requires the world to view him strictly as the bulletproof titan. In the mechanics of severe narcissism, an individual who constructs an empire based on absolute strength develops a lethal subconscious resentment toward anyone who remembers their weakness. The ungrateful survivor pathology activates. The narcissist cannot tolerate the presence of the nurse. Every time 50 Cent looks at Shaniqua Tompkins, he does not see the woman who managed his liquid diet and protected his son while he was bleeding. He sees a living, breathing contradiction to his corporate mythology. He sees the woman who knows the truth about the 5 bullets. He sees the woman who remembers the fear, the wired jaw, and the absolute dependence. Her mere existence becomes an intolerable psychological liability. The intimacy they shared in the hospital ward mutates into a profound threat. A billionaire operating on a God complex cannot share his domestic space with a witness to his mortal frailty. Therefore, the relationship cannot simply end through standard dissolution. To protect the multi-million-dollar mythology of the 9 bullets and the impenetrable armor of 50 Cent, Curtis Jackson determines that the historical record must be scrubbed. The witness cannot just be asked to leave. She must be systematically dismantled, stripped of her credibility, and forced into absolute silence. The physical violence of the Queen streets is left behind, completely replaced by the sterile, ruthless, and devastatingly effective violence of corporate legal warfare. The transformation of a human being into a multi-million-dollar corporate entity requires a ruthless, systematic fortification of the perimeter. By 2005, Curtis Jackson no longer exists in the public consciousness. He has been entirely subsumed by the 50 Cent brand. The release of Get Rich or Die Tryin' and the subsequent launch of the G-Unit empire generate an unprecedented influx of global capital. He is no longer navigating the illicit street economy of South Jamaica. He is operating within the elite boardrooms of Interscope Records and Viacom. He commands fleets of armored vehicles, private aviation, and a sprawling, highly specialized legal syndicate. Within this newly established corporate architecture, raw physical violence is deemed an inefficient and legally risky method of control. To maintain absolute dominance over his environment, the tactics must evolve. The street-level enforcer transitions into the corporate litigator. Within this fortified ecosystem, Shaniqua Tompkins is immediately classified as an unmanaged, highly dangerous liability. She is the mother of his firstborn son, but more critically, she is the sole proprietor of the unedited historical record. She witnessed the poverty, she managed the physical trauma, and she knows the exact mathematics of the 5 bullets. In the clinical logic of corporate risk management, a liability possessing unauthorized, damaging information cannot be allowed to operate independently. She cannot be left to give interviews or write memoirs that contradict the carefully manufactured, highly profitable mythology of the bulletproof titan. Her narrative capability must be neutralized. The strategy executed to neutralize her is a meticulously planned ambush within a highly controlled corporate environment. In 2005, Tompkins is summoned to the Manhattan headquarters of Violator Management. Violator, spearheaded by the formidable music executive Chris Lighty, is the powerhouse agency managing 50 Cent's career. The physical space is not neutral territory, it is the nerve center of the empire, designed to project overwhelming financial and structural authority. When Tompkins arrives at the offices, she is not entering a negotiation. She is walking into a psychological trap. According to the detailed accounts she later provides, the operational environment within the Violator conference room is engineered to induce immediate, paralyzing intimidation. She is isolated. She is not flanked by independent legal counsel. She is brought into a room populated by high-level industry executives and, crucially, a massive detail of physically imposing security personnel. This specific deployment of personnel is a recognized, highly effective coercion tactic known as bodyguard intimidation. It is the seamless merging of corporate legality with the implicit, terrifying threat of street-level violence. The bodyguards do not need to draw weapons or issue verbal threats. Their sheer physical mass, strategically positioned to block the exits and enclose the target within a confined space, completely shatters the victim's psychological baseline. The message is transmitted without a single word being spoken. You are entirely within our jurisdiction, and you will not leave this room until compliance is achieved. Placed on the table in front of Tompkins is a complex legal document. It is a comprehensive life rights and non-disclosure agreement. A life rights contract within the entertainment industry functions as a brutal legal transfer of ownership over a human being's memories, extending far beyond standard confidentiality. This document is not a standard confidentiality clause designed to protect trade secrets. It is the legal transfer of ownership over a human being's memories. By signing this document, an individual legally surrenders the right to utilize their own life story for commercial or public purposes. They grant the opposing party the exclusive authority to depict their history, their relationships, and their trauma, while simultaneously gagging themselves from ever contradicting that depiction. In the Violator boardroom, surrounded by the physical enforcers of the 50 Cent empire, Tompkins is explicitly instructed to sign the document. She is outfinanced, outnumbered, and physically trapped. The pressure applied in that room is absolute. The man she fed through a straw in a Queen's surgical ward 5 years prior is now utilizing his massive corporate leverage to legally enslave her. She is forced to sign her name, and in doing so, she signs away her voice. She effectively sells the copyright to her own existence to the man actively attempting to erase her. The devastating long-term efficacy of this legal maneuver is a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare. A physical bruise heals and a verbal threat fades, but a signature on a binding contract creates a permanent, legally enforceable state of containment. For years, the document lies dormant in a filing cabinet, functioning as an invisible chain around Tompkins's neck. It ensures that while 50 Cent utilizes his global platform to broadcast his highly sanitized, heavily mythologized version of their history, she is legally paralyzed, unable to offer a single word of rebuttal without triggering massive financial penalties. The trap is finally sprung with ruthless precision nearly a decade later. As the financial support mechanisms surrounding their son, Marquise, become increasingly strained and weaponized by Jackson, Tompkins realizes she requires independent capital to survive. She cannot rely on the volatile, punitive distribution of wealth from a hostile billionaire. She attempts to integrate into the entertainment industry on her own merits, securing a contract to appear on a reality television program titled Starter Wives Confidential. The show is designed to feature women who supported highly successful men before they achieved fame and wealth. For Tompkins, this represents an opportunity for financial autonomy and a platform to finally reclaim her own narrative. For 50 Cent, it represents an unacceptable breach of the perimeter. The bad boy era street tactics are entirely obsolete. The response is purely, devastatingly corporate. The moment the network announces her participation in the program, 50 Cent's legal syndicate activates. He does not issue a public threat. He files a massive, aggressive lawsuit in the New York courts. The lawsuit is a tactical strike designed to inflict maximum collateral damage. He weaponizes the life rights agreement she signed under duress in the violator offices. He files injunctions demanding the network immediately cease production of any footage featuring Tompkins. He threatens the production company with crippling litigation, ensuring they view her not as a valuable cast member, but as a massive legal liability. Simultaneously, he threatens Tompkins with a multi-million-dollar financial penalty for violating the terms of the coerced contract. The legal machinery executes its objective flawlessly. Television networks operate on risk assessment. They will not engage in a protracted, multi-million-dollar legal war with a global superstar over a reality show cast member. Tompkins is systematically excised from the program. Her scenes are heavily edited, and her narrative is muted. This maneuver exposes the true, terrifying objective of the legal abuse. The lawsuit serves explicitly as a mechanism of total financial starvation. 50 Cent utilizes the legal system to actively block the mother of his child from securing legal employment. He ensures she cannot generate an independent income. By cutting off her access to the labor market, he forces her back into a state of absolute dependency. He proves that his reach extends far beyond his immediate physical presence. He can sit in a mansion in Connecticut and utilize a team of attorneys in Manhattan to ensure she cannot earn a paycheck in Los Angeles. This is the ultimate chilling reality of elite power structures in the modern era. The legal system, theoretically designed to provide justice and protection, is routinely manipulated by billionaires to function as a private weapon of coercion. They utilize non-disclosure agreements, life rights contracts, and the threat of endless bankrupting litigation to purchase the silence of vulnerable individuals. They buy history. They rewrite the past to serve their corporate branding, and they legally enslave the witnesses who know the truth. Shaniqua Tompkins is left stranded in an agonizing paradox. She is a free citizen of the United States, yet she is legally forbidden from speaking about the defining events of her own life. The architecture of her imprisonment is constructed entirely of legally binding paperwork, setting the stage for a conflict that will rapidly escalate from the sterile environment of the courtroom to a terrifying, highly destructive physical climax. The architecture of legal containment possesses one fundamental flaw: it requires time. The American judicial system, even when manipulated by high-priced corporate attorneys, moves at a bureaucratic pace. It requires motions, hearings, and protracted mediation. For a billionaire operating with a severe narcissistic pathology, this delay is structurally intolerable. When a target defies an explicit command, the abuser demands immediate visible submission. If the legal machinery stalls, the tactics inevitably regress from the sterile environment of the courtroom back to the visceral, devastating violence of the streets. By 2007, the primary battleground between Curtis Jackson and Shaniqua Tompkins transitions from the conceptual space of non-disclosure agreements to a physical piece of real estate. Tompkins is residing in a sprawling 5,200 square foot mansion located in the affluent enclave of Dix Hills, Long Island. The property, valued at $2.4 million, was purchased by Jackson. However, Tompkins maintains that it was an explicit verbal agreement that the house was intended for her and their son, Marquise. It represents her only remaining physical stronghold, a fortress providing baseline security against the relentless corporate warfare Jackson is waging. Jackson, determined to completely sever her access to his resources, initiates aggressive legal proceedings to physically evict the mother of his child and his own teenage son from the premises. He attempts to weaponize the deed, utilizing the courts to force them onto the street. Tompkins, recognizing that losing the house means total destitution, refuses to vacate. She engages in a desperate, protracted legal defense, stalling the eviction orders. The standoff creates a highly combustible psychological environment. Jackson is the chief executive of a global empire, yet he is publicly thwarted by a woman he has spent years attempting to dismantle. He cannot tolerate the optics of defiance. The legal impasse means Tompkins retains a geographic footprint, a physical sanctuary that he does not control. In the mechanics of systemic abuse, an independent sanctuary is an unacceptable variable. If the court refuses to immediately deliver the property itself must be neutralized. On the early morning of May 30th, 2008, the legal dispute is rendered entirely irrelevant by an act of absolute purifying terror. At precisely 5 a.m., while Tompkins, her teenage son Marquise, and 4 other individuals are asleep inside, the Dix Hills mansion erupts in flames. Rather than a slow electrical fault, a catastrophic, rapidly accelerating inferno systematically engulfs the entire multi-million-dollar structure. The fire moves with terrifying, lethal efficiency, consuming the ground floor and violently blocking the primary exit routes. The biological reality of the ensuing minutes is one of sheer, frantic survival. The occupants are jolted awake by the smell of toxic smoke and the roar of the blaze. There is no time to secure valuables, retrieve financial documents, or gather sentimental artifacts. The human nervous system overrides all logic, executing the singular imperative to escape the rising temperature. Tompkins and her son are forced to leap from a second-story window or navigate the burning corridors, fleeing into the cold dawn air, wearing nothing but their pajamas. They stand on the manicured lawn and watch the absolute physical erasure of their existence. The local fire department arrives, but the structural damage is total. The roof collapses, the walls cave in, the mansion is reduced to a smoldering, blackened crater. Arson investigators arrive on the scene shortly after the flames are extinguished. They immediately classify the blaze as highly suspicious, noting the rapid acceleration and the specific burn patterns indicative of chemical accelerants. The house was not simply caught in an accident, it was targeted for destruction. In the immediate aftermath, Shaniqua Tompkins does not wait for the conclusion of the police investigation. Standing in the wreckage of her life, she publicly and explicitly accuses Curtis Jackson of orchestrating the arson. She states to the press that he previously threatened her life and explicitly told her he would have the house burned down. Jackson's response is a masterclass in clinical legal detachment. His defense is built entirely on an ironclad, geographically verifiable alibi. At the exact moment the mansion in New York was incinerated, Jackson was in Louisiana filming a movie alongside prominent Hollywood actors. He possesses flight records, hotel receipts, and the sworn testimony of a film crew to prove his physical absence. He utilizes this alibi to completely deflect the accusation, subsequently filing a massive defamation lawsuit against Tompkins for daring to suggest his involvement. However, in the highly organized, heavily financed architecture of the underworld, physical proximity is entirely unnecessary to execute a strike. A billionaire does not need to personally purchase gasoline and strike a match. He merely needs to issue a directive. The geographical distance provided by the Louisiana film set functions as the perfect operational shield, granting him absolute plausible deniability, while the objective is executed by proxies. Whether Jackson explicitly ordered the arson or an overzealous associate acted independently to appease the boss, the biological truth of the perpetrator is ultimately secondary to the psychological impact of the event. The message delivered to Shaniqua Tompkins is devastatingly clear. Arson is the ultimate weapon of livelihood terrorism. It is designed to bypass the legal system and strike directly at the target's fundamental capacity to survive. The destruction of the house is not merely the loss of real estate. It is the systemic obliteration of memory and identity. In those flames, Tompkins lost the physical artifacts of her life. She lost the baby photographs of her son. She lost her clothing, her personal records, and her basic human dignity. The fire is a brutal, undeniable demonstration of absolute power. It forces the victim to internalize a terrifying reality. The abuser possesses the capability to reach into her life at any moment, bypass all legal protections, and instantly reduce her entire world to ash. The true pathology of Curtis Jackson is not revealed by the fire itself, but by his reaction to it. A standard human being, even one engaged in a bitter legal dispute, would express baseline shock or concern upon learning that the mother of their child and their own flesh and blood, a rights contract within the entertainment industry, functions as a brutal legal TR, narrowly escaped burning to death. Jackson's reaction is devoid of any recognizable human empathy. In subsequent years, he addresses the fire in public interviews and on social media platforms. He does not express horror. He expresses a cold, mocking indifference. He actively laughs about the fact that she was left standing on the street with nothing. He utilizes the destruction of her home as a punchline to entertain his global audience. He treats the potential homicide of his own family as a highly amusing anecdote, a testament to his own untouchable status. This reaction is the definitive clinical proof of severe narcissistic personality disorder. Jackson completely lacks the capacity to process the suffering of others. He views the terror of the woman who nursed him back to health as a justified consequence of her defiance. He requires his audience to participate in this cruelty, gaslighting millions of fans into believing that mocking a homeless, traumatized mother is an acceptable form of hip-hop entertainment. The Dix Hills fire marks the absolute termination of the physical war. Jackson has successfully utilized the court system to legally gag her, and the flames have physically destroyed her sanctuary. She has no money, no home, and no platform. By all standard operational metrics, the target has been neutralized. Yet the ungrateful survivor pathology demands total permanent annihilation. The abuser cannot simply leave the victim in the ashes. He must ensure she is relentlessly publicly ground into the dirt. As the late 2000s transition into the 2010s, the technological landscape shifts. The era of the smartphone and the social media algorithm arrives, handing Curtis Jackson a new devastatingly effective weapon. The war abandons the physical realm entirely, mutating into a highly synchronized, relentless campaign of digital terrorism designed to execute Shaniqua Tompkins on a global stage, utilizing millions of anonymous internet users as his private firing squad. With her physical sanctuary reduced to ashes and her voice legally bound by the court system, the tangible conflict was effectively over. However, Jackson's pathology demanded a public spectacle of her ruin. As the 2010s ushered in the era of smartphone algorithms, he weaponized his massive social media presence, shifting his tactics from physical intimidation to a relentless, highly synchronized campaign of digital terrorism. Jackson immediately recognizes the utility of platforms like Twitter and Instagram. He transitions from a street-level enforcer and corporate litigator into a digital warlord. He understands that physical violence carries the risk of federal indictment, but digital violence generates algorithm engagement, global headlines, and advertising revenue. He directs a massive asymmetrical cyber war against the mother of his child. The primary objective of this digital campaign is the total inversion of a historical truth. Jackson utilizes his platform of tens of millions of followers to execute a strategy of dark PR. He systematically brands Tompkins with highly specific misogynistic labels, repeatedly referring to her as a bitter ex and a gold digger. This is a clinical masterclass in public gaslighting. He demands the global audience forget the biological reality of the year 2000. He erases the image of the woman who managed his liquid diet and washed his blood-stained clothing when he possessed absolutely zero liquid capital. By applying the gold digger label, he successfully manipulates his massive fan base into viewing her not as a traumatized survivor of a targeted arson and systemic legal abuse, but as a parasitic entity attempting to steal his hard-earned wealth. The disparity of power in this digital arena is terrifying. Jackson possesses a global broadcasting network, a team of publicists, and the cultural shield of being an untouchable hip-hop icon. Tompkins is a private citizen, stripped of her financial resources and legally paralyzed by the coerced life rights contract she signed in the violator offices. When Jackson posts a derogatory meme, a financial document, or a direct insult aimed at her, it is instantly amplified by millions of fans and entertainment blogs. He does not just attack her, he directs a digital militia. Tompkins is subjected to a synchronized global cyber mob. If she attempts to log online to defend her reputation, she is met with a tidal wave of harassment, while simultaneously risking multi-million-dollar legal retaliation from Jackson's attorneys for violating her non-disclosure agreement. she is strapped to a digital pillory, forced to endure public execution on a daily basis. The psychological core driving this relentless cruelty is eventually exposed by Jackson himself, not in a leaked document, but in a voluntarily published video. Looking directly into the camera lens, speaking with absolute chilling clarity, he delivers a clinical self-assessment to his audience. I have less compassion than the average human. This statement is not a comedic persona or a rap lyric. It is a terrifying diagnostic confession. In the architecture of psychiatric profiling, the profound absence of compassion and empathy is the defining marker of severe narcissistic and antisocial personality structures. Jackson does not view his lack of empathy as a deficit. He weaponizes it as a superpower. He proudly acknowledges that the suffering of others does not register on his emotional baseline. The most disturbing element of this confession is the audience's complicity. Jackson successfully conditions his millions of followers to view his sociopathic behavior as highly entertaining content. The internet consumes the systematic destruction of a mother's life as a spectator sport. Millions of fans click like on posts designed to humiliate her, completely desensitized to the profound psychological damage being inflicted behind the screen. Jackson proves that modern society will readily excuse and even celebrate absolute cruelty, provided it is delivered by a billionaire with a charismatic public persona. He turns the global public into his willing accomplices in domestic terror. In the mechanics of total war, when the primary target is heavily fortified or already destroyed, the aggressor inevitably pivots to the most vulnerable collateral damage. The conflict between Curtis Jackson and Shaniqua Tompkins cannot remain quarantined between the adults. It violently breaches the perimeter of their son, Marquise Jackson. For an authoritarian narcissist, a child is not viewed as an autonomous human being with independent emotional needs. The child is viewed as an extension of the executive ego, a proprietary corporate asset that must demonstrate absolute, unquestioning loyalty. Jackson applies a binary zero-sum logic to his relationship with his firstborn son. He demands that Marquise actively reject his mother to secure the financial and emotional patronage of his father. This places the child in an impossible, deeply traumatizing psychological bind. Marquise is forced to navigate the agonizing reality of a father who provides access to immense wealth but actively, publicly terrorizes the mother who raised him through poverty and fire. The breaking point of this generational fracture occurs over a single, highly controversial photograph. As Marquise enters late adolescence, an image surfaces on social media showing him associating with the son of Kenneth Supreme McGriff. The context is explosive. McGriff is a notorious Queen Street kingpin, the individual widely alleged by law enforcement intelligence and street-level narratives to have orchestrated the 2000 assassination attempt that left Jackson with a shattered jaw. The nuance of the photograph, whether it was a naive mistake by a teenager lacking historical context, or a deliberate act of adolescent rebellion against an overbearing father, is entirely irrelevant to Curtis Jackson. He does not process the event as a father dealing with a misguided son. He processes the event through the rigid, lethal codes of the South Jamaica street factions. He applies gang logic to his own flesh and blood. By standing next to the bloodline of the enemy, Marquise is immediately classified as an active combatant and a traitor to the empire. The retaliation executed by Jackson is absolute, permanent, and horrifyingly public. He utilizes his massive digital platform to execute the psychological annihilation of his own child. He publicly disowns Marquise. The cruelty reaches an unprecedented nadir when Jackson responds to a comment on Instagram regarding his son. He types a statement that completely severs the biological imperative of parental protection, writing that if Marquise were hit by a bus, he wouldn't have a bad day. This is a father publicly broadcasting to millions of people that the violent death of his firstborn son would not register an emotional response. It is the ultimate weaponization of apathy. It strips the child of all human value, demonstrating to the global audience and directly to Marquise that the billionaire's fragile ego supersedes the most basic instinct of human survival. It is an act of psychological murder, ensuring that the son carries the permanent agonizing scar of knowing his father actively wished for his erasure. This cruelty mutates into a grotesque, highly publicized spectacle as Marquise approaches his 21st birthday. In the state of New York, 21 marks the legal age of emancipation, the exact date when Jackson's court-mandated child support obligations terminate. Jackson does not treat this milestone as the adulthood of his son. He treats it as the expiration of a financial penalty. He initiates a highly publicized digital countdown on his social media platforms. He throws a literal child support release party. He posts videos and images celebrating the fact that he is no longer legally required to transfer capital to Tompkins and Marquise. This act completely commodifies his fatherhood. It proves unequivocally that his relationship with his son was never based on paternal love or guidance. It was a hostile financial transaction dictated by a family court judge. The moment the legal obligation expires, the child is formally erased from his operational ledger. The systemic destruction of Marquise Jackson is the ultimate tragic manifestation of generational trauma. The bullets that tore through Curtis Jackson's body in Queens in the year 2000 did not just shatter his bones, they shattered his capacity for fundamental human connection. He survived the physical assassination, but the trauma calcified his psychology into a state of permanent, ruthless warfare. He took the violence of the streets, repackaged it as digital entertainment, and unleashed it directly onto his own family line. He ensured that the cycle of destruction continued, leaving his son to navigate the profound, lifelong psychological scars of being publicly executed by his own father. The machinery of control is now fully autonomous, operating without physical violence, relying entirely on the devastating power of immense wealth, digital mobs, and the total absence of a human conscience. The evolution of a corporate predator eventually requires the construction of a moral disguise. As the timeline advances into the current era, Curtis Jackson executes his most sophisticated and profoundly hypocritical public maneuver to date. He recognizes that the cultural climate surrounding the entertainment industry is undergoing a systemic reckoning. The unchecked authoritarian power of industry moguls is increasingly being subjected to legal and public scrutiny. To protect his own empire from this shifting tide, Jackson does not retreat into the shadows. He aggressively seizes the spotlight. He executes a classic strategy of psychological projection, positioning himself as the ultimate moral arbiter and the fearless whistleblower of the hip-hop industry. This strategy crystallizes with terrifying clarity during the highly publicized downfall of Sean Diddy Combs, as severe federal indictments, civil lawsuits, and horrifying allegations of systemic sexual abuse, coercion, and sex trafficking surface against Combs. Jackson immediately mobilizes his massive digital infrastructure. He launches a relentless, highly visible crusade against his longtime industry rival. He posts daily mockery regarding Combs's infamous freak-off parties. He announces the production of documentary films dedicated to exposing the systemic abuse orchestrated by the bad boy executive. He loudly champions himself as the voice of truth, the solitary figure brave enough to call out a corrupt, abusive system that the rest of Hollywood enabled through silence. However, a clinical forensic examination of Jackson's own operational ledger reveals a staggering, almost incomprehensible hypocrisy. The man leading the digital mob against Sean Combs is the exact same man who spent 2 decades executing a campaign of severe financial starvation, legal enslavement, and psychological terror against the mother of his firstborn child. Jackson aggressively attacks Combs for utilizing power and wealth to control and terrorize vulnerable individuals, whilst demanding the global public completely ignore his own documented history of utilizing multi-million-dollar lawsuits, coerced non-disclosure agreements, and digital harassment to systematically destroy Shaniqua Tompkins and disown their son. This is the mirror strategy of the extreme narcissist. By pointing a blinding spotlight at the monstrous behavior of another executive, Jackson successfully distracts the global audience from the reflection in his own mirror. He utilizes the exposure of Combs's physical and sexual abuse to launder his own legacy of financial and emotional abuse. He effectively gaslights society into believing that because his specific brand of domestic terrorism utilized court injunctions and social media algorithms rather than physical trafficking, he is somehow absolved of his cruelty. This hypocrisy is not a recent development. It is an established pattern of behavior that underscores how Jackson views women and families entirely as disposable corporate assets. Throughout his career, Jackson has routinely utilized the mothers of his rivals' children as strategic pawns in his industry feuds. In his protracted conflicts with other executives and artists, Jackson actively recruited and weaponized their ex-partners, utilizing individuals like Misa Hilton to extract internal intelligence or to publicly humiliate his opponents. He paraded these women in music videos and social media posts, treating them not as autonomous human beings with their own dignity, but as literal human shields and psychological ammunition. He exploited their domestic fractures to secure victories in rap feuds, demonstrating unequivocally that in the architecture of his empire, women are nothing more than chess pieces to be sacrificed on the board of male dominance. The broader systemic implications of this dynamic are deeply disturbing. The conflict between Curtis Jackson and Shaniqua Tompkins ultimately transcends the boundaries of a celebrity dispute. It functions as a glaring indictment of the American legal system and the entertainment industry's complicity in systemic abuse. The battlefields of this war frequently materialized in the federal courts of New York, raising profound legal questions regarding the validity of contracts signed under extreme duress. When a billionaire utilizes a team of corporate attorneys and the physical intimidation of bodyguards to force a vulnerable woman to sign away her life rights, the legal system is forced to confront its own inherent corruption. The courts are designed to arbitrate disputes between equal parties, but they are entirely unequipped to handle the asymmetrical warfare deployed by megacorporations against private citizens. The fact that Jackson could utilize a coerced signature to successfully block Tompkins from securing television employment and speaking her truth demonstrates that justice in the entertainment industry is entirely transactional. The system routinely upholds non-disclosure agreements that function as literal gags, prioritizing the protection of a highly profitable corporate trademark over the fundamental human right to free speech and personal narrative. The industry executives, the television networks, and the legal syndicates observe this financial strangulation and actively choose to enforce it, proving that the entire ecosystem is engineered to protect the predator and silence the prey. The definitive history of 50 Cent and Shaniqua Tompkins is not a triumphant story of a man who survived the streets to conquer the world. It is the clinical autopsy of an ungrateful survivor. It is a terrifying blueprint demonstrating how trauma, when left unhealed and paired with limitless capital, mutates into absolute tyranny. Curtis Jackson survived 5 bullets on the asphalt of South Jamaica, but he did not utilize his survival to protect the people who anchored him to the earth. He utilized his resurrection to build an impenetrable fortress of ego. He required the world to believe he was a bulletproof god, and Shaniqua Tompkins committed the unforgivable crime of remembering he was mortal. For that crime, she was subjected to an unprecedented campaign of total erasure. He purchased the legal rights to her history. He weaponized the court system to ensure she could not generate an independent income. When the courts were too slow, her sanctuary was reduced to ash. When physical destruction was complete, he directed millions of digital followers to relentlessly mock her destitution. And in the ultimate tragic culmination of his narcissistic rage, he severed his own bloodline, publicly executing the psychological stability of his son to ensure his absolute, unquestioned dominance remained intact. This narrative demands a fundamental reevaluation of the cultural heroes manufactured by the entertainment industry. It forces the public to look beyond the platinum records, the charismatic television interviews, and the self-appointed titles of the righteous whistleblower. It requires society to recognize the chilling reality that the most dangerous manipulators do not always operate in the shadows. Frequently, they stand directly in the spotlight, holding a microphone, actively directing the public's outrage at their rivals, while they stand in the ashes of the homes they burned and the families they destroyed. The legacy of this empire is absolute. The billionaire retains the throne. The public applauds the cruelty as entertainment, and the woman who saved his life is permanently entombed in the silence he purchased.